They say every sport has rivalries, but what if the real enemy isn't on the court at all? What if the danger comes not from a competitor in uniform, but from the very system that's supposed to protect you? For Caitlin Clark, the brightest star the WNBA has ever seen, that question isn't hypothetical anymore. Overnight, her name went from highlight reels and record-breaking ticket sales to whispers of a federal investigation. A story so big it's threatening to shake the league to its core. You've seen the clips, the elbows, the cheap shots, the moments where it looked less like basketball and more like an organized hit job. But what you haven't seen is the full picture, the secret campaign, the coordinated silence, and the one breaking point that forced Clark's team to take the fight out of the arena and into Washington, D.C. Because this isn't just about fouls anymore. This is about power, jealousy, and a conspiracy so blatant it's now being compared to workplace harassment under federal law. And if the WNBA thought this was just another rookie hazing story, they're about to find out how wrong they were. Every story has a tipping point, a single moment where things cross a line and nothing is ever the same again. For Caitlin Clark, that moment didn't come from just one hard foul or one angry opponent. It came from something much deeper, much more dangerous. It was the realization that the league she was carrying on her shoulders, the one she had just injected with record-breaking ticket sales, TV ratings, and fan excitement, wasn't going to protect her. That no matter how many hits she took, no matter how obvious the targeting became, the people in charge had already chosen silence. And that silence was louder than any foul. Because when you're the biggest star in the game, when arenas are selling out because of your name alone, and yet you're still being treated like a disposable rookie, it stops being a basketball problem. It becomes something bigger. It becomes betrayal. That was the breaking point for Clark and her team. Not just the blows on the court, but the betrayal off it. And once that realization hit, the game changed forever. What had started as a cold war of silent documentation was about to explode into open conflict, one that would drag in politicians, lawyers, and eventually the federal government. The breaking point didn't come out of nowhere. It was built, brick by brick, hit by hit, until the evidence was impossible to ignore. Statistically, Caitlin Clark wasn't just another rookie absorbing the usual welcome to the league roughness. She was the bullseye. In the 2024 season, Clark absorbed 17.6% of all flagrant fouls in the entire WNBA. Think about that for a second. Out of hundreds of players, one woman, a rookie, was taking nearly a fifth of the league's most dangerous hits. That's not a coincidence. That's a target on her back. And the clips tell the story better than any number ever could. Chennedy Carter blindsiding Clark with a shoulder check while the ball wasn't even in play. Angel Reese winding up and making direct contact with Clark's head on a shot attempt. Marina Mabrey shoving her with the kind of force you'd expect in a hockey brawl, not on a basketball court. Different teams, different players, same message. We're coming for you. At first, the defenders of the league brushed it all off. They told fans this was just physical basketball. They said Clark needed to toughen up, as if nearly a fifth of all flagrant fouls landing on one player could ever be normal. But as the clips piled up, the excuses started to crack. This didn't look like random roughness anymore. It looked like a campaign, a coordinated effort to humble, punish, or even break the rookie who had become the face of the league. And that's when the masks started to slip. Rumors can be denied, statistics can be spun, but when the truth slips out of someone's own mouth, that's when speculation turns into confirmation. And that's exactly what happened with Sophie Cunningham, Caitlin Clark's own teammate. On her podcast, Cunningham didn't just allude to rough play or rookie hazing. She said it outright. She admitted that inside the Phoenix Mercury's locker room, there were real conversations about Clark. Conversations that weren't about defense or matchups or game plans. No, they were about teaching Clark a lesson. Her exact words were, "I know the talks Phoenix had in their locker room of, we're going to show her what the W really is." Read that again. We're going to show her what the W really is. That isn't trash talk. That's premeditation.
That's intent. It proves that what Clark was facing wasn't just a series of random fouls from frustrated opponents. It was a coordinated plan to physically test, intimidate, and humiliate the rookie who had become the face of the league. And Cunningham didn't stop there. She admitted that while rookie hazing is common, there's just more for her. In other words, this wasn't normal. This wasn't business as usual. This was personal. That single confession flipped the narrative. Fans who had been told Clark just needed to toughen up suddenly had evidence that the hostility wasn't in their heads. It was real, it was deliberate, and it was happening behind closed doors. The mask had slipped. And once it did, the league could never put it back on again. When the hits kept coming and the proof started slipping out, fans expected the league to step in. After all, Caitlin Clark isn't just another rookie. She's the single biggest star the WNBA has ever had. The reason arenas are selling out, the reason TV ratings have tripled, the reason merchandise sales exploded by over 500% in just one season. In any other league, protecting that kind of star would be priority number one. But in the WNBA, the response was chillingly simple: silence. No strong statements from Commissioner Engelbert, no warnings to teams, no public defense of the player who had single-handedly brought more attention to women's basketball than anyone in decades. Just silence. And that silence wasn't neutral. It was a choice. Every foul Clark absorbed, every shove, every blow to the head, all of it was met with the same deafening lack of accountability from the league office. Instead of standing up for their most valuable asset, the WNBA acted like she was disposable.
But here's the thing, this wasn't the first time. Years earlier, former star Candace Wiggins revealed she had been bullied out of the league, not for her skills, but for who she was. Wiggins described a culture so toxic, so resentful, that players actively tried to hurt her because she didn't fit in. At the time, the league brushed her off, called her dramatic, and buried the story. Now, her words sound less like exaggeration and more like prophecy. What she described then, a culture of jealousy, hostility, and silence from the top, is exactly what Caitlin Clark is living through today. So when the league stayed quiet, fans weren't just angry, they were horrified. Because silence in the face of abuse isn't leadership, it's betrayal. And that betrayal would only make what came next even more explosive. If the fouls told one story and the silence told another, the all-star votes revealed the truth in broad daylight. The fans, the lifeblood of the game, the people who actually pay for tickets, jerseys, and streaming packages, voted Caitlin Clark into the All-Star game with a record-breaking 1.3 million votes. That wasn't just a win, it was a historic statement. The fans weren't just watching her, they were crowning her the face of the league. But when it came time for the players to cast their votes, the picture was very different. Her peers didn't put her at the top. They didn't even put her near the top. They ranked her 9th among guards. 9th. Think about that. The fans saw a superstar, someone pulling the league into the spotlight like never before. The players saw a threat and treated her like she didn't belong. And that wasn't just an oversight. It was a message, a public display of resentment dressed up as a vote. A way of saying, we don't care how many people you bring to the game, we don't care how many records you break, you're not one of us. That's jealousy, plain and simple. Not the healthy kind that pushes athletes to work harder, but the toxic kind that festers, lashes out, and tries to drag someone down instead of lifting the sport up. And when you put that jealousy next to the hits on the court and the silence from the league, it paints a picture that's impossible to ignore. This wasn't just physical targeting, it was cultural. It was systemic.
The resentment had gone from the hardwood to the ballot box, and the message was clear. Caitlin Clark wasn't just being challenged, she was being isolated. But while her opponents and even some of her peers were busy trying to tear her down, her camp was doing something they never expected. They weren't just watching, they were preparing. While the league stayed quiet and the players circled around their own, Caitlin Clark's team was playing a very different game. They weren't just taking the hits and hoping for protection that never came. Behind the scenes, they were documenting everything. Every shove, every blindside shoulder check, every comment from a podcast or locker room leak admitting she was being targeted. Nothing was forgotten, nothing was ignored. It was all time-stamped, cataloged, and quietly filed away. At first glance, it looked like Clark's camp was just weathering the storm. In reality, they were building a case, not a highlight reel for fans, a federal case for lawyers. A paper trail designed to show a pattern, a culture, and ultimately a violation of her civil rights as an employee in a hostile workplace.
Think about the foresight it takes to do that. Most rookies in her position would have been rattled, shaken, maybe even broken. Clark's camp, they anticipated it. They knew the jealousy would come. They knew the targeting would escalate. And instead of waiting for help that would never arrive, they prepared their own arsenal. So when people say the escalation caught the league by surprise, that's only half true. It caught the league by surprise, but it didn't catch Caitlin Clark's team off guard at all. They were ready. And when the moment finally came to unleash that arsenal, it wasn't going to be subtle. It wasn't going to be gentle. It was going to be a detonation. Every buildup needs a trigger. For Caitlin Clark and her camp, that trigger came in one play that the whole world saw. But it wasn't the foul itself that broke everything open. It was what happened next. The hit came from Chennedy Carter, a blindside shoulder check away from the ball that sent Clark to the ground. It was blatant, it was reckless, and it was exactly the kind of targeting everyone had been warning about. Fans braced for a flagrant foul. Some even expected an ejection. But what did the referees do in that moment? Nothing. Not a whistle. Not even a serious warning. Hours later, under the crushing weight of public outrage online, the league quietly upgraded it to a flagrant. But by then, the damage was already done. To Clark's camp, that wasn't accountability, it was damage control. A move made to calm angry fans, not to protect their star. And if the ref's silence wasn't enough, the players made it worse. Instead of condemning the cheap shot, many of Clark's peers rallied behind Carter, openly defending the hit as if it was just part of the game. That's when the mask truly fell off. Clark's team saw it clearly. The referees weren't going to protect her. The league office wasn't going to protect her, and the players themselves were celebrating the targeting. That moment wasn't just about a foul. It was about betrayal. It was the proof they needed that the system wasn't broken by accident. It was broken by design. And once they saw that, they knew they couldn't win by playing inside the WNBA's rules. They had to change the battlefield. They had to go federal. When Caitlin Clark's camp realized the WNBA wasn't going to protect her, they stopped thinking like athletes and started thinking like attorneys. And that's when the battlefield shifted. It began with a letter, not from a fan, not from a coach, but from Congressman Jim Banks, landing directly on the commissioner's desk. In it, he demanded answers about the league's failure to curb the escalating physical targeting of one player. That letter wasn't just political theater. It was a warning shot, the first signal that Clark's case was now bigger than basketball. Then came the headlines.
A blistering Wall Street Journal op-ed written by former White House staffer Sean McAllen called for a federal investigation into whether the WNBA had created a hostile workplace. Overnight, the conversation shifted. It wasn't about flagrant fouls anymore. It was about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the federal law that protects employees from harassment and discrimination in the workplace.
That was the genius of Clark's camp. By reframing the issue, they forced the WNBA out of its comfort zone. No more brushing off cheap shots as part of the game. No more gaslighting fans about rookie hazing. Now the question was whether the league itself had allowed a toxic, dangerous environment that violated federal law. And here's where it gets dangerous for the WNBA. Because in a federal case, there's one word that keeps executives awake at night: discovery. That's the legal process that would force the league to hand over internal documents, emails, text messages, even referee communications. Imagine what might be buried in those files. Imagine an executive telling refs to let them play when it comes to Clark. Imagine mocking complaints from her agent. One unsealed email could be the smoking gun that exposes the entire conspiracy. That's why this moment was so explosive. It wasn't about Clark getting fouled anymore. It was about Clark's team detonating the legal arsenal they'd been quietly building for months. What the league thought was just a basketball issue had suddenly become a federal case. And the fuse they lit was still burning. The WNBA thought this storm would pass, that fans would move on, that Clark would toughen up, and that the headlines would fade. But that's not what happened. Instead, the noise grew louder, and the voices joining in weren't just fans on Twitter. When ESPN's Stephen A. Smith went on national television and said plainly that Caitlin Clark's camp had a case, it sent shockwaves. Because if one of the loudest voices in sports media could see the line between competition and harassment being crossed, the league couldn't dismiss it as fan paranoia anymore. The conversation had escaped their control. And behind the scenes, the whispers in Washington were growing. Reports began circulating that federal agencies were already conducting preliminary reviews of the evidence Clark's camp had documented. In other words, the paper trail wasn't just sitting in a lawyer's office anymore, it was being looked at by the government. That's when the league's real nightmare became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about bad press. This wasn't about a few angry fans. This was about subpoenas, sworn testimony, and the possibility of discovery unearthing every private email and every hidden directive. One leak, one careless message could be the fuse that ignites the entire case. And the scariest part? The fuse is already lit. Every day the WNBA stays silent. Every day they refuse to address the targeting head-on. The fire creeps closer to the powder keg. What started as a few hard fouls meant to teach a rookie a lesson is now on the edge of becoming a full-scale legal detonation. The league wanted to put Clark in her place. Instead, they may have unleashed the one fight they can't win. Every story has a breaking point. For Caitlin Clark, it wasn't just the bruises, the cheap shots, or the jeers from rivals. It was the moment she and her team realized the WNBA wasn't failing her by mistake. It was failing her by design. And once they saw that, the script flipped. What was once a rookie being welcomed to the league turned into a federal case, complete with congressional letters, op-eds in national newspapers, and whispers of investigations that could drag every hidden email and every hidden directive into the light. The league thought they could ride out the storm, that Clark would be silenced, or at least softened by the pressure. Instead, they created a revolution. The harder they hit her, the stronger the case against them became. And now every day of silence isn't safety. It's another inch toward detonation. Because if one unsealed document proves the league turned a blind eye, if one email shows negligence at the top, the WNBA doesn't just risk bad headlines,
They risked their very foundation collapsing under the weight of their own cover-up. They thought a few fouls would humble her. Instead, they may have triggered the biggest reckoning in league history. The breaking point has been passed, and the next leak, the next headline, the next unsealed file might not just change Caitlin Clark's career. It might bring the entire house of cards crashing down.